Hi everyone, welcome back to Nasedyanka, the channel where I talk about Bulgarian history, culture, tradition, and faith. This is episode 34, part 3. I am going to talk to you in a manner of continuation to recent questions about some of the differences between the East and the West, faith-wise. So I am going to continue to share in this part a few more. I shared some in part 2 from the same episode 34, and now I'll talk about a few other comparisons between the Orthodox Christian Church, which is what my country of origin is, Bulgaria, and then Roman Catholicism, how that's different, and then Protestantism. This is very it's formal and it is informal because I basically had a conversation with my husband who went to seminary. I interviewed him, I wrote down my questions and answers. We both discussed, and that's how I put together this information so that I can share with you. But this being said, if you are interested in Orthodox Christianity, definitely make sure that you have the Orthodox Study Bible. Make sure that you are contacting an Orthodox Christian priest. This is not something just for laity people. I can share from a laity from Bulgaria, and my culture has a lot in depth to contribute to the world. But definitely that's not the only reliance. And so with this disclosure, I'm just going to delve in. Hoping that it can just bring enrichment. And as I typically say, I trust that you guys know that you have heads on your shoulders and you can make free, educated decisions. Okay, so I mentioned in the previous part, in episode 34, part 2, I mentioned to you about the Great Schism, which took place in 1054 AD. This is when the Roman Catholic Church was formed, and it basically is the product of breaking away from the mother church, which is the Orthodox Christian Church. Contrary to many Protestant branches that stemmed after that in reaction to the Roman Catholicism, Catholic Church, contrary to what many of them believe nowadays, that there is no such thing as the old church, actually we do exist, and we are called the Orthodox Christian Church. It's very easy to check the facts and study the timeline and history and the tradition of the Holy Fathers and Mothers. So one point here of difference between the East and the West is the discussion of, of the Holy Theotokos, of the Mother of God. And so here is something interesting. I have heard people in the West ask me questions about, but how come God, in the Old Testament is one, and then God in the New Testament appears different? How is it possible that there can be such a raging and violent God? Some people call him hateful and so forth. So I mentioned in the previous part of this episode, let's not undermine people's interpretation. People's level of evolution and understanding, of course, is going to influence how they interpret and perceive reality. The bottom line, the truth is that there is only one God. There is no God of the Old Testament, of the New Testament, and then some other future testament. God is God, and this is revealed in the Bible. For Orthodox Christians, we recognize this truth. Now, here is something interesting, though. And I'm noticing that many people nowadays shy away, if not they're upset about discussions of DNA. Now, I am sad to witness in the West that this has been used against humanity. It's been, people have used false arguments on the basis of DNA, pretending that, stuff I've heard, that they should preserve their DNA within the church and not mix with races, for example. Well, that's not Orthodox at all. And here is something. I took a note that I wanted to share with you. So basically, yes, there is history in the Old Testament when God has sent calamities, natural disasters, and he has cleared people. But it's also true that he mixed the people. All of those old Jews, he basically mixed the peoples. And it is said to us that everybody has access in the New Testament to the truth, to the medicine, the way of salvation. It's not just a select race that's going to get saved, but everybody. Now, I'm fascinated by DNA because of the many realms that have been researched about it. For example, from trauma studies, we know that epigenetics have talked much about trauma being transferred from generation to generation to the generation through our DNA, more so the outside expression of our DNA, not the core. We also know that, there are books that talk about cosmic molecules, energetic studies, and they all refer to how energy or certain characteristics can be transmitted again through our DNA. Well, such are things like the fallibility, the illness or the evil of human nature. And so it is possible. God had to prepare the peoples over the centuries in the Old Testament until there would have been one, humble and clean and pure woman worthy enough of holding God. Now, nobody is worthy 100% because every single human is fallible. Every single human is prone to making mistakes, right? Only Christ is infallible, is sinless, like we say. So, that being said, I did want to emphasize on the difference between how the Catholics are revering the Theotokos, that's the Mother of God, how Protestants are looking at her, and then how we Orthodox are looking at the Mother of God. For example, the Catholics have perverted the perspective, the treatment of the Mother of God in a way that they treat her as all immaculate, and they've even decided that she's holier than having ordinary human kind of traits. They've elevated her very highly spiritually. Protestants, on the other hand, contrary to Catholics, completely got rid of the idea of paying reverence to the Mother of God. And I have encountered this time and again in terrible confrontations or attempts of confrontation. The perspective of the Orthodox Church is in the middle. We see the Mother of God, and I'll share some proof from the Bible actually, but we see the Mother of God as a human being, just like any one of us, but one who exemplified following God's commandments, one who had humility of heart, one who was an example of the virtues. That doesn't make her perfect, and it doesn't make her immaculate, like the Roman Catholics tend to say. The problem here is, with Roman Catholicism, is that they elevated the Mother of God to such perfectionism and, again, immaculate consumption, immaculate nature, that it becomes unattainable for an ordinary human being. Protestants, on the other hand, diminished the meaning of the Mother of God to the point of, I really want to say, of lacking the capacity or the discipline of respecting women. So here's what I wrote in my notes that I'll share, and then I'll make a few more comments. And I wrote those notes in Bulgarian language, so bear with me here. So she is a woman, the Mother of God, as a vessel. And by the way, she carried him in her womb, right? Because she gave birth to him. So we say that she's a vessel that carried God, and also she is a throne in which God sat. He sat on her like in a throne. There's a part in the Bible where Elizabeth, being led, like the Holy Spirit is guiding her to exclaim that the Mother of God has, what kind of a miracle she's witnessing to be greeted by the Mother of God. This is the part where Mary is visiting her. Also, the Mother of God says, let's see if I can say that in English, all people will call me blessed. From this generation on, all people will call me blessed. So there was a patriarch from the Holy Orthodox Church, I believe in Jerusalem, not very sure, but he basically asked, well, since the Mother of God herself said, from now on, all generations will call me blessed, what generation do Protestants think they are? What generation do they call themselves to belong to, since they don't call her blessed? They don't pray to her, they don't revere her, they don't even talk about her. Here are a few more glimpses, if you bear with me. One of those is to notice that the clothing that Jesus Christ wore had the capacity to heal. So his clothing alone was so permeated by the healing light of God that it was capable of healing. We know about the woman with the blood issue who just touches him barely and she's healed. On top of that, in the Bible, we also are told that the shadow of the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Paul, how can I say, as he was walking, people from the crowds were throwing themselves in his shadow because from it they were receiving healings. Now, this tells us several things. On the one hand, it bears a lot of witness to the meaning of the Mother of God. On the other hand, it also bears witness to icons. Well, the Western world of Protestantism does not revere icons, and as such, I can see that it's also thrown away the councils of the Holy Fathers, which actually have included this in our tradition. And the icons basically are exactly what I'm talking about here. An icon is an image, or like windows through which we can see and connect. We can pray. We can connect with the other human on the other side. We make contact, just like if we look at pictures with our loved ones and we're moved to tears. If we look at our departed loved ones, if we look at our loved ones that are still living and they fill us with love just by looking at the pictures, so much more icons. And in this case, the shadow of the apostle is one of the greatest examples of how miraculously and mysteriously icons, images can work. Come back to the Mother of God. The the very womb of the Mother of God that carried Christ, our God, so much more. How would it not be permeated with this blessedness, with this holiness, with this, again, call it energy of God. Her cells, her hands held him, her cells are permeated. So, and one thing we know, let's see how I translate this, той освещава всичко, той е Бог. This really means he is God. Освещава really means he makes holy everything that he touches. And so this is the reason why we look at the Mother of God with great respect. So if you think about it, God is light, light energy, emanation of light in the form of energy. I mean, he is an identity, he is God. And all of those that are a part of him, they, especially those who carry his genetics, his DNA. I mean, the Mother of God, again, he has some of her DNA, right? She gave birth to him. That's the whole point of the salvation, by the way, that God became incarnate. He took the shape and form of a human being. That means he had blood, he had flesh, he had feelings, mental challenges, emotional challenges, if you want to put it that way, just like a human being does. But he fought the urges and the temptations, the passions, like we say, and because he alone is sinless. He gave us an example of how to live a life in God. So coming back to Protestantism in the West, and when I say Protestantism, I'm really putting all of the branches that broke out after the Roman Catholicism broke away from the church. So among those Protestant sects, I've heard things like, oh, well, but he says in that part of the Bible, woman, I have nothing to do with you. What do I have to do with you? So we're referring here to the miracle where he turns water to wine. There is that part in the Bible where he is performing his first miracle that we know of. And what do we really know about that situation? What's important is that, yes, he calls her woman, and there are many speculations about how back in history and historical context that actually was a reverent name to call a woman, kind of like nowadays lady or miss. But here's something that's, I think, deeper. He actually listens to her with regards to many things, and he actually grants her requests, her desires. He grants her wishes. He sets the example of how to respect a woman, let alone how to respect a wife. Now, I'll pause here. This is part of Bulgarian culture. Women stand in a equal position as men. They're highly revered, respected. A woman, a mother, a grandmother. We have songs that are, elevating the status of a woman, and songs that elevate the status of a mother, and songs again that elevate the status of a grandmother. Midwives, we call them grandmothers, babi. They have again a high status. They're revered with great respect in our culture. And again, Bulgaria is intricately intertwined, again, weaved in with Orthodoxy. So, as we all, human beings, pray now to the Mother of God, she intercedes for us to Jesus Christ, to her Son, who listens to her. He granted her request at the wedding, as the Bible tells us, when, as we see, he went and he literally turned the water into wine, like she asked him to, even though he told her that his hour had not come yet, even though he should not have done it yet, even though it was on time, divine wise, like for the divinity it was on time, he still granted his mother that request. So much more would he grant when we pray to her to intercede for us on our behalf. The status of women in the Orthodox Church is elevated in that way. We look at women with great reverence and respect. Unfortunately, in my experience in the West, I have heard time and again for 25 years in a row, year after year, men, kind of mocking women, speaking of them as in a kind of like subjugation kind of manner, emphasizing how women have to be quiet, how women have to act like they're stupid or like negligent or ignorant. It's a shock to hear that a human being can have that way of perception. And I can see that this is the fruit of Protestantism. This is the fruit of a faith that's not full. Now I'm speaking energy-wise. It's a faith that does not have the whole truth about our existence in it, and so it becomes volatile and susceptible to perversions. Now, of course, the other way is true as well. If women talk negligently about men, if women talk hatefully about men, which I unfortunately hear daily in my life in the West, this also is not right, because ultimately our Lord Jesus Christ came to earth in the form of a man, and he is an icon, an iconic example of how meek and good-natured a man can be, and men are called to emulate him. Now, do they all do it? No, but so also are women. Women don't emulate the Holy Theotokos, the Mother of God. We're given an example, and what we say is we're given medicine, but just because we're given the medicine doesn't mean that we're going to take the medicine. It takes free will. It takes free will to consent. And if somebody does not consent, God does not force that person. So that's equivalent to healing. I may be given medicine to heal, but if I don't take it, I don't consent to it, and obviously my health deteriorates, well, it's really not God's fault. This is a consequence to my decision. Now, the fact that there are rules and laws about our nature, and I speak here about energetic nature, that's a whole other matter. And the way I can kind of like compare it, just to give you an example on a basic level, is take road rage and driving, for example. We all have rules so that we may be preserved. We all drive and we know that we should hopefully stop at the red light. We go at the green light. We stop at the stop sign. There are rules and expectations about vehicles giving their left signal when they make a left turn and their right signal when they make a right turn. And unfortunately, in the Western world, it's almost daily, you guys, I notice people do exactly the opposite. It's like they're rebelling, or maybe they're not thinking, but so many times, and I know I have friends who complain about road rage, but somebody will give their left signal and yet turn right, or somebody is like pressuring us. As a matter of fact, yesterday, as my husband and I drove up to the mountains and we came back, there were probably 3, if not more, but at least 2 or 3 that I can clearly think of right now, people who pressured us. And this is clearly road bullying. This is not an Orthodox Christian spirit, but I've seen it a lot in the Western, in the fruit of Protestantism, which actually took back what they thought was Christianity by force, with the use of power and control. And ultimately that is not right. That's completely wrong, and it goes against God's will. So here, I'll come back to the Mother of God. Basically, we Orthodox, and of course Bulgarians are Orthodox, majority of us, we also know that since the soul of the human is eternal, and the Mother of God, now having passed into the other side, is eternal, her soul is eternal, she still continues to intercede for us. This here is another difference between the East and the West. From what I've heard, in the West, specifically in the Protestant denominations, sects, people don't pray for the departed. They don't have specific services for the departed. And they kind of tend to assume that when somebody dies, they just go to heaven or hell and that's it. That's very shallow and basic. But in the Orthodox tradition, we are carrying out a living faith, a living tradition. So we know that God is a living God. He's not locked between some kind of an Old and New Testament and some kind of a locked down rule. We know that we can implicate him. We know that we can communicate with God. We know that we say prayers for the departed, and there are different sets of prayers according to the different situations and occasions. So we pray for their good when we love them, of course, when we want. And this, by the way, is the role of the Orthodox Church, to pray for the salvation of all people on earth. So actually in Luke, in the Bible, chapter 20, line 38, it is said that he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, because in him live all the living. Okay, here, as I just mentioned, the Orthodox Church prays for the salvation of all human beings. Maybe this is a place to also include another difference, minor difference, but deep difference. I've heard from Protestant denominations that they say something like, see, I am the greatest of sinners, therefore I must forgive all those that are sinners as well, such as murderers and thieves and abusers and perpetrators and so forth and so forth. This is very incompatible with the original Orthodox Christian church. Forgiving perpetrators, putting out victims who say that they cannot forgive, or who just get triggered or just struggle. It's not a just, but it's a real struggle. Is not a Christian virtue. It's not a Christian trait. And that's how we say that Protestant churches are not churches. They're not, because they broke communion with the Orthodox Christian Church. The Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, is not a church because it broke communion with the Orthodox Christian Church. What is needed here is a person, whether that's the priest or the laity, with, like we say, duchoven opit, with a lot of spiritual experience, deep spiritual experience, and duchovnu leczenie, so spiritual healing. That person must understand the spiritual counseling, spiritual mental health, spiritual healing, and direction, in order for that person to give the appropriate care to a victim and an abuser, to people who are facing that kind of problems. And it is not correct to just wave with the hand and say, I forgive, and I forgave. And this does not exclude people from anywhere around the world. There are Orthodox Christians, of course, who also pretend. And just because the Orthodox Christians pretend doesn't change how the church is. This is people's fallibility and their own decision making. It has nothing to do with how Christ's church is and has been established. So let's see. A lot of the questions here will stem from the question about, Christ says we have to forgive 7 times 77. How does that work? If those people don't forgive, then they must be possessed by evil and they're going to burn in hell and blah, 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 blah. Well, all of that is jumping to conclusions. It's actually disrespecting God and free will. And so if you actually, here's the thing. As I spoke with my husband, I said, okay, how would you respond to this? And he said, I'll tell them, he said this: if you truly have the spiritual power, strength to forgive right away, then you are, he said, blажeni. The word is blessed, and blажен is even deeper than blessed, but I don't know how else to translate it. But basically, if you truly possess the power, that spiritual power to give true forgiveness to somebody that just offended you, then okay, this is a blessing. That's a gift. That's a blessing. But if you only say this because it is said in the Bible that you should say it, that's not forgiveness. And Christ did not say I forgive you. He said forgive. So now we're getting on to another realm, the journey of what forgiveness means, and the fact that forgiveness is a whole process of healing. There are steps, it takes time, and sometimes it takes a lifetime. So just saying it does not equal thinking it, processing it, and by processing I mean digesting it with your mind. You have to make sense out of it, and then accepting it, as in like letting go, moving on, right? But that doesn't happen that instantaneously, not in most cases. Saying it for the sake of saying is not forgiveness. Expecting somebody to forgive somebody else is not Christian. So in my observation and experience, Protestants often turn against the victim in Western communities by forcing the victim to forgive, by speeding up the process, like hurry up, you have to forgive, otherwise you're going to burn in hell. But the truth is that this victim really cannot, is not ready, it's not time, they really don't feel the desire to do it. And so in that way, you see how there is a jumping to conclusions, to rapid judgment, basically. Protestants end up judging. So I was talking to my husband and I said, what would you do with this? And he said, okay, imagine this example. Imagine if I said to this person, okay, I'm going to slap you in the face really hard, and then I'll face you and I'll say, forgive me right now. Will they forgive? Most people will fill up with bloody anger and desire to take revenge, if not just resentment, right? This is human nature. All this is to say that it is encoded in our human nature. It is natural for us to not be able to grant forgiveness immediately. And so to expect it from somebody else by means of coercion, manipulation, force, or gaslighting, or any of those, gross methods is not Christian again. The Holy Fathers and Mothers in the Orthodox tradition have described in utmost detail steps as to how to proceed towards things like that, like understanding our human nature, understanding our feelings and thoughts and our urges, and how to fight with those invisible forces. So this is the place to say that if in such a case a victim is incapable or unable, right, to grant forgiveness, then it is in the typically in the clergy, it's the priests in the priest's decision hands to approach an abuser, to talk to each separately and actually separate those people and ask if there's a perpetrator to place them in a separate placement, whether that's a church or that's in their own house or in jail. I think I mentioned this in the previous part. But basically, this is the point where in Orthodoxy, the priest will be working, or different priests will be working separately with those people. This is not something I've witnessed in the West. In the West, I'm witnessing nowadays people discussing the necessity for policies and procedures. But the Orthodox Christian Church already had those policies and procedures in place in the first centuries. And again, that's called the book of the canon laws of the Holy Orthodox Christian Church. By the way, the Catholics also changed some of those canon laws for the Church, and they are not supposed to be changed. Now, some of them may apply to our context and others may not apply to our context, but each of them has a place and a meaning, and they should not be just removed just like that. Kind of makes me think about how people remove, things from, or they try at least to, change Bulgarian history from our school books. Just because they change the books and they take away certain facts doesn't change the trajectory, energetic trajectory through time of what happened. As a matter of fact, the truth still catches up at some point later on in life. Another point here I'm going to include before I wrap up with this part today is on Catholicism, a few extra points of difference with Orthodoxy, with the Orthodox Church. And Roman Catholicism, there is such a thing as we call indulgency. I think you guys might call them indulgencies. This is the form of paying money or some kind of a work for sins to be absolved. This does not exist in the Orthodox Christian Church. This is how we Orthodox understand that just because somebody said their prayers, or just because somebody did a great deed, just because somebody paid money, just because somebody pays tithes, tithing, just because somebody acts righteous, doesn't mean anything. It's good for them. I mean, work on your heart, work on your soul to grow in Christ. But this is not something we're going to clap at, and we're not going to recognize as absolution of sins. The Orthodox know that the priest has the authority to read prayers. So he's interceding on our behalf, the humans, that go and confess, for example, our sins. He can intercede for us to God. He can say prayers for us, much like me as a therapist, for example. If a client comes to me and requests a certain service and I have to go obtain training, or maybe I have to go check it out with another colleague, with my supervisor, for example, I have the authority in that way to speak with that other person. But so is the priest. He has an authority to intercede by prayer for us, but he is not a replacement of God. Whereas the Roman Catholic Church created this idea of the Pope replacing God. So let's see. Another example that I wrote is in terms of the wine and the grape juice. I won't dig too deep here, but in Protestantism, for what I've heard, they use grape juice to provide Holy Communion. But that's not what Christ tells us in the Bible. It's very clear in the Bible that he is giving Holy Communion using bread and wine. It is described in the Last Supper in the Bible. So we provide Holy Communion with real wine. There's a lot of symbolism and meaning about this in depth. Another difference that I took a note of is with Roman Catholics, the Holy Communion, according to them, the Roman Catholic Church, works. Whether you believe in it or you don't, if you take Holy Communion, you'll be saved. It works in you. It works wonders. We Orthodox don't believe that. We recognize that if a person is partaking of Holy Communion, which is a mystery, it is Christ's blood and body, if we partake in it and that person doesn't believe at all, then it's not going to have that miraculous effect. As a matter of fact, we know that it can burn the soul. It can actually cause damage. This is where you will find in the Orthodox Christian Church, you will discover that certain people are prohibited from taking Holy Communion. And as a matter of fact, even though we are encouraged to partake of Holy Communion as often as possible, it's not a good idea to partake of Holy Communion too often, especially if somebody is proceeding with the mindset that this is just some kind of a bite, some kind of a snack, or people have not prepared properly. We have to go through a preparation. There are lots of steps for that. I will not go in depth right now, but this is meant to, so the withholding of Holy Communion is for the purpose of preserving the soul of that person. It's not condemnation. It's not sending anybody to hell. It's not punishment. It's not saying you're a bad person, shame on you. No, that does not exist in the Orthodox Christian Church. The Orthodox Christian Church aims at healing. And if the Orthodox Christian Church recognizes that certain actions are going to cause damage to the energy body, the soul of the person, call it energy body if you want. I'm using that because I know that modern medicine is a little more open to this. There's a field of energy psychology nowadays that is kind of like delving a little deeper into that. The point is that the Orthodox Church has already had these remedies in place. And the same, by the way, goes with epithemia. I have noticed that the West is very strictly, I don't want to say strictly, but by far against epithemias. Epithemias are consequences that priests in the Orthodox Christian Church are required by training to give to the people, laity, who go for confession. So if I confess, depending on my sin, in other words, my mistake, the priest is required to give me some kind of penance. This is very different, completely opposite to what the Roman Catholic's penance looks like. Roman Catholic's penance goes with a very wretched, perverted way of feeling guilty for oneself and feeling shame. This actually is a sin according to the Orthodox Christian Church. In the Orthodox Christianity, however, a penance is more like, and I compare that with mental health, it's more like if I see my client struggle with a certain pathology. So let's say they're having a core belief that is very negative, and as a matter of fact, it's damaging to their system, and so it is destroying them. Then I will give them certain experiential activities, certain homework, something to ponder, something to practice, something to write in their journal, something to go over. And there are many different things. I'm not going to go in depth with that. But from a mental health perspective, that is clear, that's understandable. And the reason why we give those activities is so that they can help the individual to perceive and also obtain, how can I say, to overcome certain barriers, so they can obtain a bigger perspective. They can receive a fuller perspective of what's going on, and in that way challenge and correct their distortion that previously was working against them. Well, in the Orthodox Christian Church, again and again, we're not working only on a mental level. We're not working on an emotional level. It's not just a physical level, but it's involving the deeper spirit, soul, the soul of the person. That's, again, like, if you want to call it the energy body, then go for it. But so far, I'm just not going to go in that depth. This is something I'll leave in the hands of priests to explain. But basically, the Orthodox Christian Church recognizes that we're not just mind, body, and emotions. We also have a soul. And that's different from the spiritual interpretation of nowadays scientists or psychologists that talk about spirituality and contrast it with religion. So from that perspective, when an Orthodox Christian goes for confession, they're going for healing. They're saying certain things that they know they need in order to align their soul, to align themselves, again, on the path that is following Christ. So I will leave you with that you may ponder all of this chunk of information. There is a lot. I have disclosed before, and I am going to emphasize this here again, that my channel is for the bare purposes of a hobby. This is not my job. It's not related to my job. Yes, I do have a full-time job, and surely I don't have necessarily always the time to be engaging in spreading the word about Bulgaria and sharing insights. But it brings me joy to be able to share, to reach out to people across the world, to translate sources from the Bulgarian language to the English language, since they have not previously been translated and shared in general. And this, I'm going to continue to do this again by spreading out information and sharing it with you guys in terms of Bulgarian culture, Bulgarian history, Bulgarian facts, Bulgarian traditions, Bulgarian customs, Bulgarian clothes and songs, and of course, yes, Bulgarian faith too. Why is it important to know about Bulgaria? Well, because Bulgaria is one of the oldest cultures in the world, and even though it's not been something that our modern day books talk about much about, I mean, they're doing more and more research and bringing this information up, to the open, it's still a fact. My native city contains the oldest gold that was manufactured by human hand in the world. It's called the necropolis. Bulgarians have invented a lot of things that we're using in the world, such as the wristwatch. The computer was invented. The first computer was invented by a Bulgarian. The yogurt is Bulgarian. There are many discoveries nowadays and discussions about Bulgarians who have left traces near India as well as Egypt, and they have spread as far as east, as far as west goes. So yeah, that is fascinating. And I intend on continuing this kind of research and share. So if you guys have questions, if you are interested in more topics, feel free to share in the comments section. Usually when I quote things or I'm translating resources, I add the sources appropriately in the description section or the comment section. Today, again, since that was a very informal conversation between my husband and I, and he did not want to be on camera, so I was talking to him on our way driving back from the mountains yesterday. I just decided to put it in a synopsis like this and put it out there again in the world. So I hope that this can bring some food for thought and some smiles in addition to the reflections, some joy. And with that, I hope the rest of the day goes well for you, wherever you are. And yeah, I'll see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.